So the New York Giants just suffered a very humiliating loss in the divisional round against the Philadelphia Eagles. Marlo, I'm very sorry for your loss.
You
With
didn't
that
have to
being
use the word
said,
humiliating, but yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, the game was over in the first quarter. It's hard to get worse than that. With that being said, they now head into a pretty key offseason. They have several key free agents, including their quarterback, Daniel Jones, and their star running back, Saquon Barkley. And there's already a lot of questions flying around on what the Giants should do. Should they bring them back? If they do bring them back, how should they bring them back? Should they give them multi year extensions? Should they franchise tag one of them? Marlo, I'll start with you because you are the Giants fan in pain. What are your initial thoughts on what the Giants should do with their key pending free agents?
I'll start with the easy ones. You can basically hand Dexter Lawrence a blank check. I think that Dexter Lawrence should be signed no matter what happens. I think Saquon Barkley is also pretty easy too. I think that the Giants have a number for him, whether it's 14 million, whether it's $14.5 million. And if he wants a penny over that, I say goodbye, Saquon, because honest to God, and if this was 2-3 years ago when Saquon Barkley was playing really well and was the entire offense, I would say differently because he was the most valuable player to this team. Saquon Barkley is no longer that player. When you have a coaching staff, a real offensive system here, they will be able to get use out of, a lot of different plays, including the running back position. I don't value the running back position highly at all. So I would look to re-sign Saquon, but at a price that I'm comfortable with. Daniel Jones is obviously the big question mark. For me, I like Daniel Jones more than others, but I'm not comfortable giving him a contract more than 3 years. I would kind of cut it off at 3 years. And then you also have to discuss whether or not, how much money are you giving him? That's going to be tough to decide as well, because if you're going to let him hit the open market or not, there's a chance a team overpays for him that is absolutely desperate for a quarterback. And I don't think the Giants are going to be comfortable getting into a bidding war for Daniel Jones. I don't really think any smart team should. I think there's a price that the Giants probably have, but I would bring him back in a 2-3 year contract. And because the Giants don't have much more of an option, it's not like they're picking at the top of the draft unless there was a player that they fell in love with at the quarterback position. Then you say, okay, let's go add that guy. But right now, that player does not look like he's available. I don't think the Giants are in a position where they need to go trade for a quarterback like the Jets, and we'll talk about that later. This roster is still being built. I mean, this is year one of a rebuild, and they made the playoffs, but it's still year one of a rebuild. So they have to see what they have in Daniel Jones and kind of add pieces around him for the next 2 to 3 years, not 4, 5, 6 years.
What's your number for Saquon? What did you say the number you give him?
I would go up to like 14 and a half million.
Yeah, that's fair because I'm looking at the calculated market value. It's saying 12.3, but that's in a perfect world. Obviously, he's going to ask for more than that, and you're probably going to have to give him more.
He declined 12 and a half a year for 4 years.
Mixon's making 12 a year for 4 years. Kamara's making 15 for 5 years. Cook 12.6. Christian McCaffrey, highest paid, 16 million. So I don't know if he'll probably ask to be the highest paid running back. Will he get highest paid running back money? Who knows?
He said he's not looking to break the market.
I know he says that.
He also took away his agent's leverage in any negotiation. I mean, right after the season started, he said, I haven't made it easy. I've been injured a lot. And you're right, Saquon, you've been injured a lot since being drafted, and you're not, the youngest guy anymore in the NFL standard. So I don't think this guy will get $16 million. Not with the Giants, not with this front office. I don't think so.
Well, it's very important. Obviously, in a cap space sport like this, you need to be very technical, obviously, with how you allocate your finances. So, Saquon is a great player, obviously, but like you said, how much do you value the running back position? Same thing with Daniel Jones. Obviously, the quarterback's a very valuable position, but like we just saw Bills general manager Brandon Beane say, talking about the Bengals, they have the benefit right now of having a quarterback that they haven't had to pay yet and blah, 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 where they have money to spend in other positions. So with the Giants, Daniel Jones, if he's asking for too much money, I'd rather use that money to get a quarterback maybe a little cheaper, maybe go out in the draft, see what you can do, but try to use the money that you want to save to spend on other positions. Same thing with Saquon. Running back, how valuable is that position? We've seen what the Dallas Cowboys have done with Zeke. That hasn't worked out. I guarantee you Jerry Jones wishes he could have used that money to pay for a receiver or some other sort of position. So I think this Giants offseason, they don't have a ton of cap space. They got guys coming off the books. They don't have a ton of cap space, though. You're obviously hindered by the Kenny Golladay contract. You need to act fiscally. I mean, obviously any team needs to do that, but it's especially important for them where at some point, yes, you want to keep Daniel Jones. Yes, you want to keep Saquon Barkley, a guy who has people come to the field to watch him play. And you want to keep these young core guys that you've drafted. But if the money gets too high, you're going to have to say goodbye. I mean, you can't overspend and get irresponsible here.
Before Joe goes, just want to say the cap space. I'm pretty sure their number is going to be at around 50 million. And then after they cut Kenny Golladay, which they can do post June 1st, that goes up, and there's not much dead money on that contract after June 1st.
Right.
So I mean, the cap space after they re-sign their guys and they give Dexter Lawrence a contract and other guys, yeah, they may not have much, but to start the offseason, they are going to have some cap space.
But let's also remember who's going to be on the market post June 1st. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, yes, they'll free up the cap, but who's going to be on the market?
No, completely agree. But I'm pretty sure they're going in with like 55 million going into the offseason.
Right.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, and I'll see both of you kind of said a lot of great points. And the first thing I'll address Saquon first. So it's always that great debate every single offseason, right? It seems like people are so like the new hot take is never pay running backs, right? Like people bring up these statistics about Super Bowl winners, they never pay their running backs more than $4 million against the cap or whatever it is. I don't necessarily think that there is one formula to winning a Super Bowl that just hinges on how much money you're paying your running back. I think that the Giants, however, are not really in that position yet where realistically they're going to be competing for a Super Bowl, even if they retain every single one of their free agents. With that being said, Saquon Barkley is 25 years old. And if he is looking to get, let's say, $14-15 million a year, 4 years, he could be productive for maybe the first 2 or 3 years, maybe even the entirety of that contract. But the question is, are you wiser spending money elsewhere? Are you wiser maybe investing more in the offensive line, investing more into the front seven, into your secondary, whatever it may be, into more weapons? We know that they need more wide receivers. With that being said, I think that I would lean towards if Saquon Barkley, if there's a competitive market for him, if you have teams that are built to win now, to win a Super Bowl, like the Buffalo Bills, or even someone like the Miami Dolphins that are bidding for his services and driving his price up, if I'm the Giants, I'd be pretty comfortable letting him walk. Now I'll move on to Daniel Jones. So, we've been talking about Daniel Jones a lot over the last week. And, me and Merlo have kind of been butting heads talking about him because I've kind of been like I've been perceived as like the resident Daniel Jones hater, but I'm not a Daniel Jones hater. Okay. I will admit, I think that some of the praise that he's got in the past couple of weeks, especially from Giants fans, has been a little much at some points. I mean, Merlo, I remember you at one point sending a text saying that you would be comfortable with Daniel Jones being the Giants franchise quarterback for the next 5 to 7 years. And I know you kind of pulled back. I think that was after
the first Viking game they lost, I'm pretty sure.
I think it was. And I know you pulled back on that a little bit, but I have seen some pretty outrageous takes about Daniel Jones. And one thing that I disagree still with you on with him is that I think that we already sort of know who Daniel Jones is. When you talk about him, you say, we still don't really know what we have in Daniel Jones. I don't want to give him more than 3 years because, what if he ends up not being great and then we want to move on from him? To me, with Daniel Jones, it's going to be all about price. If you could keep Daniel Jones's cap hit at a number that's low enough that you could still build around him, because Daniel Jones, I think, is always going to be that kind of quarterback that he's in that Jimmy Garoppolo, Mac Jones, that type of tier where he's a physically limited quarterback. He doesn't have great arm strength. He's not the most accurate guy, especially down the field. And this season was kind of the first season that we saw him take care of the ball better than he had in the past. And a lot of that has to do with how well Dable coached him up. And he really deserves a lot of credit for that. I do expect a little bit of regression in the turnover category as the years come. He was still 8th in the NFL in turnover worthy throws. And as we know, he had actually the lowest interception percentage in the NFL. So there's probably going to be some regression there. But nevertheless, Daniel Jones and Brian Dable still do deserve credit for what they were able to do this season. With that being said, though, I think we know what Daniel Jones is. If you're the Giants and you're sitting there and you're saying, okay, we could get Daniel Jones at a team-friendly deal and we could build around him for the next couple of seasons, then I would be all for that. I have no issue with the Giants, as long as the Giants are willing to accept that Daniel Jones is never going to be that guy that's going to, he's never going to be in that Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, that type of category where he's really going to elevate your offense. And I think most Giants fans understand that. But also, I have seen rumors floating around of, most. I've seen some outrageous takes recently that, if he gets to number one, if they trade for DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to turn into Josh Allen and whatever. Obviously, those are some outlier, ridiculous fans. But anyways, I think that if you're willing to accept that Daniel Jones is a limited quarterback and that you can win with him if you put the right pieces around him, then that's great. Then you got to pay him like that. But we've seen some rumors floating around that if they give him a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal, and they give him something similar to what like Nick Foles got a couple of years ago, and they're paying him $30 million a year. I mean, if he's getting $30 million a year, you're talking about he's going to be, I believe, like the seventh highest cap hit amongst all quarterbacks in the NFL. And you're immediately limiting yourself on how much you cocould win. If you're paying a very limited quarterback that type of money, you're just going to be, if this is supposed to be the second year of a rebuild, as you keep saying, Merlot, adding this type of cap hit with a limited quarterback is just not the way to go. And I think that if Daniel Jones commands that type of money, the Giants should let him walk out the door.
And ideally he doesn't. And I don't know what, him and his agents are going to be looking for. I think from the most non-biased view, I think the Giants right now with Brian Daboll and hopefully Mike Kafka next year are most likely his I don't know how I'm trying to say this, but being a New York Giant next season with this coaching staff and hopefully an improved roster gives Daniel Jones the best opportunity to succeed than taking your chance elsewhere with, an unknown coaching staff and, they just signed you. I think Daniel Jones' best chance to succeed next year and for the next couple of years is with the Giants. So I hope in contract negotiations, that's how it goes. Now, that's just my hope, but I'm going to say this. And I'm not one of those cuckoo fans that think Daniel Jones is going to be in this tier with Joe Burrow and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. I'm not even considering that. But there aren't many guys like that. There aren't many Trevor Lawrences and, like the top 5-6 quarterbacks in this league where no matter what's going on around them, you're going to have a chance to win every single season, every single game. I don't think he's that guy. And he doesn't have to be that guy, like we were saying. But can he improve with a number one wide receiver and offensive line help? 100%. In a second year of an offense where there's more trust now with the coaching staff between him and the coaching staff, and he has more trust in the coaching staff, and they know his abilities exactly, then I think he can absolutely improve on this season. I think his ability to run is a weapon. I think in today's game in the NFL, it only helps. I think, we're coming to a point now where a lot of these great quarterbacks have the ability to run. Even guys like Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes can get out of the pocket and scramble and gain a ton of yards. Daniel Jones, you can run QB powers with him. He can obviously get out of the pocket and scramble for a bunch of yards. When he's at his best, I think, especially this season, he's been running or throwing, someone on the run here with, again, not so great wide receivers. So in a season where he didn't turn the ball over, and granted, he wasn't taking shots. He, with a wide receiving core that he had, and frankly, why would the coaching staff want to put him in a position this season where the Giants basically had to play mistake-free football to win games no matter who they were playing. Against the Texans. If Daniel Jones turns over the ball against a game versus the Texans, there's a chance the Giants are going to lose that game. So the coaching staff is never going to put them in a position where they're going to say, here you go, take a shot deep. Because A, he may not have time. The offensive line ratings are not good from what I've been reading the past couple of days. And secondly, the wide receivers, going down the field. You cannot trust Darius Slayton going down the field. You cannot trust Richie James going down the field. So they're not going to put their quarterback in a difficult situation like that when he knows not only, the players around him are limited, but we haven't seen this guy really take deep shots down the field, in his career.
I want to say one thing, and I know we're focusing on Daniel Jones right now, but Merlo, we talked about it the other day on our episode. The Giants need to close the gap between them and the Eagles.
Yes.
And that gap is really big. And I hate to rain on the parade. Like the Giants, they had a great year, a surprising season. It was very nice. All that being said, me personally, I think this team overachieved this year, and I think they overachieved by a pretty decent margin. You go look at the numbers. This is a team that had the 18th ranked offense in football and the 25th ranked defense. Those numbers are obviously discouraging. And it makes sense when you look at the roster. And I think that's why we should praise Brian Daboll so much for the job he's done. I think he's done an amazing job. I think he's the coach of the year. However, is that sustainable over the course of a couple of years? It's not. Now, obviously, they're not going to carry the same team from year to year. But if you want to improve this team as much as you can, and we're going to keep going back to the point about what are you going to do with your money? You need to be extremely careful with how you allocate your finances this offseason. And I don't even know if there is a way where they can close that gap with the Eagles and become a better team or even a playoff team in the next season.
Yeah, nobody's asking them to do so. That's impossible.
But I'm saying if I'm a Giants fan, obviously, like, you're riding high right now, sort of, after that year, you're feeling good. It was supposed to be a rebuild year, and you ended up making the playoffs. If I'm a Giants fan right now, I don't know if I'd be setting playoff expectations again for my team next year.
I don't think the Giants are going to make the playoffs next year. Next year, to be completely honest with you.
Well, you're a smart fan, and they might. You might be, surprised again. But looking at this team and the roster, it's they need a lot of help. They need help at receiver, like we said. They have no tight ends, which is fine. I mean, that's a position that you can kind of get away with not having. The offensive line, right? You have the left tackle's figured out. Hopefully, the right tackle's figured out. You got to give Evan Neal time. Interior offensive line, you can make a couple tweaks there, right? You can improve the O-line there. Defensive line's good as long as Lawrence is given an extension and you don't have to worry about edge, right? They've addressed that in the draft. The linebackers are putrid. We talked about that.
Terrible.
And the secondary isn't great either, by any means. Great, they're not good. The secondary isn't good. So you got a lot of things you need to address. On top of that, we're talking about what do you do with the quarterback? Do you give the quarterback the money? Do you not? I think that this Giants team needs to not get distracted. I want to go back. It's actually funny. It's a little ironic to the San Francisco Giants, right? We saw that happen in baseball where they won 108 or 111 games, whatever happened, and the organization was kind of blind. It was kind of blinded by the record to where they thought that they had a contender, and then they go out the next season, and they miss the playoffs and they have a bad season.
Yeah.
Going to the New York Giants, I think that's sort of what we saw this year. So my point is, I think the Giants front office needs to remember that this is still a rebuild. They need to stay engaged in that rebuild mode and not make some dumb decisions over the offseason to put too much money in one place where it might not make sense and it might hurt them in the long run. Still be in that rebuild mentality. And I think this team will be good in a couple of years. And I'm talking like really good. I think they got the coach figured out. So that's the most important thing. You got the coach figured out. The next most important thing is the quarterback. We're not sure about that yet. And the next most important thing is the left tackle, and you have that figured out. So they got 2 out of 3 things figured out.
Yep.
Stay in that rebuild mentality. Do not give Daniel Jones $30 million. That's just me personally. I would rather just let him walk, maybe give him a franchise tag, whatever you got to do. But I'm not giving this guy $30 million over 3+ years.
Who's going to be the quarterback, though? Like, that's the thing. Now
really matter.
Now you're in limbo.
The Giants are in such a unique position because I agree with basically everything JM just said. I mean, I think that the Giants should probably take seriously the gap was really exposed between them and Philadelphia in that divisional round game, albeit it's one game. But
and we're just talking
point,
about the Eagles, not the Cowboys play there too.
Right. Exactly. And at some point, like there's got to be some regression to the mean. And it happened with the Giants because I mean, we're talking about a team that had a negative point differential during the regular season, won a lot of really close games, had a pretty weak schedule. And I think that they, like JM said, should stay in that rebuild mode. Because if you go into this offseason and you say, yeah, we had a winning record and we won a playoff game. Now we got to take that next step, right? Like let's beef up this run. Let's go trade for DeAndre Hopkins. Let's give Daniel Jones $30 million a year. We were able to get to the divisional round with him as our quarterback. To me, I'm stepping back and I'm saying, let's be realistic here, okay? Daniel Jones, like I said, a limited quarterback. You have to be comfortable with the fact that you're going to have a limited quarterback on your roster that's going to need a lot built around him over the next few years in order for you to win. I mean, if the Giants are going to make the playoffs next year or the year after that, the offense is going to have to be a lot better. I think that when the coach came in, and I agree with JM, I think that Brian Daboll is the guy. I think that that's something that the Giants have figured out, right? And the fact that they were in the playoffs with a negative point differential is a testament to how good Brian Daboll was and the way Daniel Jones played as well. I think that when Brian Daboll came in, he knew, okay, I have a quarterback that's on his, in a contract year, is limited with his ability, isn't really able to push the ball downfield, isn't really the most accurate guy. And I think a big thing that we miss when we talk about Daniel Jones is that I agree that obviously, they don't have a number one wide receiver. Their wide receiver core is arguably the worst in football, right? And that is something that, needs to be taken into consideration when we do talk about Daniel Jones. However, I think that Brian Daboll was excellent this season at scheming guys open. I think that I was watching a film breakdown on Daniel Jones a couple of days ago, and they were talking about how there are a lot of instances where there are these deep shots available for Daniel Jones downfield, and he just doesn't pull the trigger. And I wonder if the reason for that is that the coaching staff is literally telling him, Daniel Jones, please don't throw the ball downfield because we just don't think you're capable of doing it, or we really just got to make sure we don't turn the ball over. Or maybe it's a Daniel Jones thing. I mean, if they have these guys running these deep routes, you would think they'd want him to throw it to them if they're open. So I mean, again, we're talking about a guy that had less big-time throws than guys like Andy Dalton and Marcus Mariota and Zach Wilson. Like, he's just not a guy that has shown that he's capable of being an above-average passer in the NFL. He had the lowest intended average air yards in the NFL this season. And yet he still was eighth in turnover-worthy throws. So he's not pushing the ball downfield, and yet he's still putting the ball in harm's way more than you would probably like. So to me, if you're rebuilding, if you're really seriously, if you're taking this rebuild really seriously, there's just no way that you're giving Daniel Jones anything above what his value truly is, not even his market value. If another team wants to overpay him, let him walk.
And I think we're kind of forgetting what the Giants have done, especially go back to, this past season. There were all these talks about whether or not they should trade for a wide receiver at the deadline. They had a good record. They held, one of the wild card spots, and they refused to trade any draft picks to go get a wide receiver, a veteran wide receiver. They traded a first-round pick from last season for more picks in this upcoming draft. They are clearly set on building this team for the long haul. I have absolutely no doubt about that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have the right vision for this team. I think they're still completely on this rebuild. They look at their roster, and obviously, I mean, anybody with half a brain looks at the roster and says it's incredibly limited. You guys brought up every need they have: interior offensive line, depth, the defensive line. I love the defensive line. They need depth on the defensive line. Like, that's their strongest unit, most likely, defensive line. And yet they still need depth there because they're rotating guys in that are getting pancaked with one hand by Jason Kelce in the playoff game. They need depth there as well. Obviously, you said the linebacking core. They can use a couple of guys in the secondary, 100%. Another corner, probably another safety. They have a lot of needs. They have a lot of draft picks, and I love the draft that Joe Shane just had, and I think he's a great talent evaluator, and I think he'll continue to draft well. But I think there's going to be a disappointment from the Giant fan base that if they're not in the playoffs next year, they're going to look at it as a failure. Especially if they are to bring Daniel Jones back. I think fans will look at it as a failure. And, you guys brought up their offense and defensive ranks. The Giants can have a better season next year and miss the playoffs. That's 100% on the table. And wouldn't shock me if that's what happened. But you're 100% right in what you're saying about, continuing the rebuild. The quarterback, though, I'm lost on it. I don't know what they should do. We obviously don't know the price that he's looking for. If it's anywhere, 30 plus, I'd probably walk away. But it's a tough decision. It's a really tough decision. They had an end of the year press conference the other day where Joe Shane had said, like, this guy's going to be back next season. He's going to be the quarterback next season. He kind of slipped up with saying that. I don't know what they know, obviously, but I'm hoping that if they can get a deal done, I'll throw this number out there, anywhere from the $20 to $25 million range for the next 2 to 3 seasons. If that's what they are paying him, I'm okay with that for the next 2 to 3 seasons.
I would be fine with that too. I mean, it's not, you're not breaking the bank exactly, and in this climate, that
the way quarterbacks get paid,
the way everybody gets paid, because like you were saying, you don't really know what else you would do. There's not a ton of options out there. Now, this is actually a pretty good quarterback class coming up right now, one of the best we've seen.
And the year after is even better.
The past couple of years. And the year after is going to be even better. You don't have a lot of options. You got to stay in the rebuild mode, like we said. It's okay if you re-sign Daniel Jones. Listen, I'm not acting like Daniel Jones is Zach Wilson. He is a capable quarterback, a guy who you could win with. You're going to have to give him a lot of help, but he's not a guy who's going to hinder your team and weigh them down like a guy
Jay,
like
let me ask you something, though. What's a lot of help? Because, again, we're talking about an offensive line that ranked in the 20s this year when it came to pass blocking. We're talking about a wide receiving core that you both just said was the worst in football. So what's a lot of help? A capable offensive line, a top 12 offensive line, and a pretty good receiving core? I mean, what if we gave him that? What if he had that this past season or in this upcoming season? Let's say he had these players to work with, and now it's like, oh, maybe he threw 25 touchdowns and 8 interceptions and still rushed for, 5 to 7 touchdowns and, rushed for another 700 yards. Now we're talking about a seriously capable quarterback. So, you're saying giving help. 100%. Every quarterback needs help, unless your name's Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow, but they still need players around them. So
right,
you need talent around these quarterbacks, and Daniel Jones was dealing with a lot of nothing other than a left tackle and a good running back. I mean, come on.
With you. I don't disagree with you completely, but I think that when we talk about like a lot of these other quarterbacks, like that you just mentioned, like Joe Burrow's had a bad offensive line his entire career, right? Patrick Mahomes, not a lot of great receivers this year, and honestly, a lot of that is attributed to the fact that, it takes up so much cap space now, and, they can't afford to put as much around him as they were able to when he was on his rookie deal. But the thing with those guys, with Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, even older guys, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, whatever, we know that they are physically, like they have the physical traits to elevate an offense, right? I don't think Daniel Jones has those physical traits. He's an above average rushing quarterback. Absolutely. But we're talking about a guy that has, in the grand scheme of things in the NFL, below average arm strength, is not accurate down the field, and is not willing to pull the trigger to take those shots down the field either. Is basically playing chicken shit all the time, which, again, we don't know if that's because of the coaching or the wide receivers or whatever. But
I think it's the wide receivers and the way they had to play. If the Giants were out of it, by the middle of the year, I think we would have, they would have said, all right, F it. Daniel Jones, I want to see what you could do. Seriously, I want to see what you can do. But when the Giants are in a position where, they can make the playoffs and Jones is playing well and they're not pushing the ball down the field, like they're going to say, all right, Daniel, maybe we're not going to take these shots on the field. And it's not like he didn't take any shots down the field. I mean, I could think of a few in my head where he's throwing down to Darius Slayton and Darius Slayton drops the ball, or, it's deflected and, it wasn't a good throw.
Yeah.
But
but clearly he's throwing the ball down the field much less than anybody else, because when I bring up that statistic, like intended air yards, that, it doesn't matter if Darius Slayton drops a 70-yard touchdown.
Right.
That's an intention to throw the ball 70 yards. So he's not willing to push the ball down the field. I think he's a physically limited quarterback, and the Giants need to accept that.